Just like to read a few verses from the scriptures. The first one is Exodus 19 verses 1 to 19. And the second is Exodus 24 verses 4 to 8. In the third month after the Israelites left Egypt, on the very day they came to the desert of Sinai. After they set out from Rephidim, they entered the desert of Sinai, and Israel camped there in the desert in front of the mountain. Then Moses went up to Yahweh, and the Lord called to him from the mountain and said, "This is what you are to say to the house of Jacob, and what you are to tell the people of Israel. You yourselves have seen what I did to Egypt, and how I carried you on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. Now, if you obey me fully and keep my covenant, then out of all the nations you will be my treasured possession. Although the whole earth is mine, you will be for me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words you are to speak to the Israelites." So Moses went back and summoned the elders of the people and set before them all the words Yahweh had commanded him to speak. The people all responded together, "We will do everything Yahweh has said." So Moses brought their answer back to Yahweh. And Yahweh said to Moses, "I am going to come to you in a dense cloud, so that the people will hear me speaking with you, and will always put their trust in you." Then Moses told Yahweh what the people had said. And Yahweh said to Moses, "Go to the people and consecrate them today and tomorrow. Make them wash their clothes and be ready by the third day. Because on that day I will come down on Mt Sinai in the sight of all the people. Put limits for the people around the mountain and tell them, 'Be careful that you do not go up to the mountain or touch the foot of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death. He shall surely be stoned or shot with arrows. Not a hand is to be laid on him. Whether man or animal, he shall not be permitted to live. Only when the ram's horn sounds a long blast may they go up to the mountain." After Moses had gone down the mountain to the people, he consecrated them, and they washed their clothes. Then he said to the people, "Prepare yourselves for the third day. Abstain from sexual relations." On the morning of the third day, there was thunder and lightning, with a thick cloud over the mountain, and a very loud trumpet blast. Everyone in the camp trembled. Then Moses led the people out of the camp to meet with Yahweh, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. Mt Sinai was covered with smoke, because Yahweh descended on it with fire. The smoke billowed up from it like smoke from a furnace. The whole mountain trembled violently, and the sound of the trumpet grew louder and louder. Then Moses spoke, and the voice of Yahweh answered him. Exodus chapter 24, verse 4 to 8. Moses then wrote down everything that Yahweh had said to him. He got up early the next morning and built an altar at the foot of the mountain and set up 12 stone pillars representing the 12 tribes of Israel. Then he sent young Israelite men, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed young bulls as fellowship offerings to Yahweh. Moses took half the blood and put it on the bowls, and the other half he sprinkled on the altar. Then he took the book of the covenant and read it to all the people. They responded, "We will do everything Yahweh has said. We will obey." Moses then took the blood, sprinkled it on the people, and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that Yahweh has made with you in accordance with all these words."
That was quite an occasion when Israel met with Yahweh on the Mount Sinai. It was like a marriage, a group of people coming together to meet their Maker, making a covenant. And our theme for the next few weeks is partakers of the covenant. And I just want to recap a little. A couple of weeks ago we had a message preached by David, which was Elohim of Promise. And David covered the nature of the covenant as an agreement between two parties. And it was suggested that a covenant was made in the beginning with Adam. And this we find in the book of Hosea, where it says, "But like Adam, they have transgressed the covenant. There they have dealt treacherously against me." So you cannot transgress a covenant that you haven't made in the first place. A covenant also was made with Noah, and this is assumed to be an unconditional and a universal covenant. It includes Yahweh's promise to mankind that he would not flood the earth again. A little further down the line, Yahweh chooses a man called Abraham, who he brings out of his homeland and sets him in the land of Israel, promising that he is going to make of him a great nation, and through him all peoples of the earth will be blessed. And last week we had a visiting speaker who taught us of all the troubles caused by that covenant that came about as a result of an issue of birthright. Because although the promise was made to Abraham, it wasn't to be the inheritance of all Abraham's children. There was a chosen seed, which firstly came through Isaac, and then through Jacob, who, remember, had brought the birthright from his brother Esau. You see, it was Jacob who earlier on had caught the heel of his brother in the womb. It was Jacob who had wrestled with an angel of Yahweh and said, "I won't let you go until you bless me." It was Jacob whose family had ended up in Egypt and cried to Yahweh for deliverance from slavery, who was saved by being obedient to the directions given for the Passover, who journeyed through the Red Sea, who saw their enemies defeated, who were led by the prophet Moses to the mountain of Yahweh. It was the family of Jacob who heard the voice of Yahweh at Sinai, and who responded to a spirit of covenant, saying, "All the words that Yahweh has said, we will do." You see, at Sinai, Yahweh raised the bar for a people, for a nation. Remember also that it was Jacob who was renamed Israel after he'd pursued the blessing of Yahweh. You see, there was a price for that blessing. And Yahweh was dealing with a nation whose patriarch had been persistent from before birth, who had grabbed the heel of his twin, who had presented himself before his father Isaac to receive the blessing of the firstborn, even though it wasn't rightfully his. Who of us craves the blessing of Yahweh? Who wants the blessing of the Father on our lives? Who wants to be part of his chosen people? See, the riches of Yahweh's blessings are evidenced in those who are prepared to raise the bar and be obedient to him. Yahweh presented Israel with a standard. Said, this is my law. This is the book of the covenant. There was a contract, not between two equal parties, but between Yahweh as the authority and the people as the servants of Yahweh, who were going to take that law and they were going to obey it with all their hearts, weren't they? Or that's what they voiced anyway. It was through Jacob that a people of promise was born, and through Moses that the covenant of promise was established with Israel. But this was not an unconditional covenant. It was a covenant which they had to be obedient to, and there were consequences of disobedience. We've heard the account of Moses meeting Yahweh on Mt Sinai, the awesome presence being displayed by natural and supernatural forces. You know, this was more than just a sign to mankind of the greatness of Yahweh. This was Yahweh revealing himself and his divine nature to a people with whom he wanted to make an everlasting covenant. This was more than a promise from a loving Heavenly Father to his chosen people. This was an invitation to a relationship of obedience. Yes, there were promises, but they had to obey. And the consequences of disobedience were laid out in Deuteronomy in a list of curses that neither you or I would want to be the benefactors of. You see, this people of promise who had experienced the wonders of Yahweh, they grasped the challenge and they responded to a call to holiness. All the words that Yahweh has spoken, we will do, and we will be obedient. Deuteronomy 28 it is that shows us the blessings of obedience, but warns of the curses. And even if they slipped, yes, sacrifices could be offered to cover sin, but the ultimate aim was total obedience, and only this could fulfill the requirements of the covenant. So, how did they take this challenge? How did they live out this challenge? Well, that's another story. I've got a few thousand years to cover today, so I'm glad I'm glad Bev put me a bit earlier, because we might be here a mighty long time. No. Right, but I'm not going to go right through from Genesis to Malachi just yet. I'm going to skip a bit to the book of Hosea again. Okay? Because here we see an illustration of what actually happened to this covenant relationship. We've already mentioned the scripture. Like Adam, they have transgressed the covenant. There they have dealt treacherously against me. You see, the nation of Israel was no more able to walk before Yahweh in true obedience than their father Adam. And by the time Hosea prophesied, Israel was close to being scattered, split up, a nation no longer. Their relationship with Yahweh was abominable, so much so that it is depicted by harlotry. In the book of Hosea, we find a strange story of the prophet Hosea himself, who was commanded by Yahweh to go and marry a prostitute. Hosea 1, verse 2-4 says, when Yahweh first spoke through Hosea, Yahweh said to Hosea, go, take to yourself a wife of harlotry, and have children of harlotry, for the land commits flagrant harlotry, forsaking Yahweh. So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. And Yahweh said to him, "Name him Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will punish the house of Jehu for the bloodshed of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel." What was Yahweh saying through the prophet Hosea? Well, first of all, he tells him to marry a prostitute whose name is Gomer. And one of the meanings is Gomer is complete or come to an end. So, was he saying, Israel, your time is coming to an end? The first son who was born was called Jezreel. And we heard last week that that means scatters. But I want to point out it also means sows. So you sow, you scatter to sow, don't you? We then read that Hosea and Gomer had more children, a daughter called Lo-Ruhamah. And Yahweh said, "Name your daughter Lo-Ruhamah, because that means no mercy." So was it now that Yahweh's mercy had run out with Israel? They had a son who they were to call Lo-Ami, meaning not my people. You see, this situation that Yahweh was putting Hosea in was not unlike the situation that Yahweh found himself in with the nation of Israel, who had committed themselves to a life of obedience at Sinai, but had transgressed, gone away, done their own thing. And through Hosea, Yahweh is now saying, "I know Ephraim, and Israel is not hidden from me. For now, O Ephraim, you have played the harlot. Israel has defiled itself." So how did they get there? From Sinai to a place where Yahweh more or less wanted to wash his hands of them, cut them off. Had they committed themselves too hastily to a covenant that was unreasonable to maintain? Well, in order to find out how they got to that place, we've got to go on a bit of a journey through history. Let's have a look then at this nation, this people of promise, and see where things went wrong. Now, this is a bit of the history lesson, okay? So we know that Israel wanted a king. Why did they want a king? To be like everybody else, to be like the other nations. It wasn't good enough for just Yahweh, the supreme being, to reign over them. They wanted a king, okay? And originally, they were ruled as one monarchy, firstly under Saul, then under David, and then under Solomon. However, we find a point where Solomon strays and Yahweh is angry with him. In 1 Kings 11, verse 9, it says that Yahweh was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned from Yahweh, the God of Israel. Okay? And from then, things kind of go a bit pear-shaped. Right, I'm wondering if the line came Saul, David, Solomon. Solomon had a son called Rehoboam. Okay, so you can be Rehoboam. And Solomon also had a servant called Jeroboam, so you can be Jeroboam. Okay. Now, because of Solomon's disobedience, Yahweh proposed to rend the kingdom, split it up, and to give it to Jeroboam, the servant. And because he said to Solomon that you've not kept my covenant and my statutes, which I have commanded thee. But, however, the man Jeroboam was a mighty man of valour. And Solomon, seeing the young man that he was industrious, he made him ruler over the house of Joseph. And it came to pass that at a time when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite found him in the way, and he had clad himself with a new garment. And the two were alone in the field. So we have a prophet and we have Jeroboam alone in a field. And so the prophet takes hold of a garment and he rends it into 12 pieces. So the garment was rent in 12 pieces, and he said to Jeroboam, take 10 pieces. So has Jeroboam got 10 pieces? Yes, right. For thus says Yahweh, the El of Israel, behold, I will rend the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon and will give 10 tribes to thee. Okay, so Israel was then split into a northern kingdom and a southern kingdom. Okay, can we have, yeah, we've got it on there, haven't we? Jeroboam and Rehoboam. Okay. Yeah. So we can see here a map of Israel, and we have the kingdom of Israel in the north and the kingdom of Judah in the south. Is that right? Because I'm not very good with my norths and souths either. Okay. Right. So throughout the reigns of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah, we have a long journey which is up and down and up and down. And if you look at that chart there, okay, right, you'll notice that in the middle there's some greys and whites and blacks. Okay. Now, people kind of grade, if you like, these kings, whether they were good, bad, terrible. If you see it very dark, a black colour, that means they were wicked, right? If you see that it's a bit grey, then they were, you know, a bit lukewarm. If you see that it's nearly white, then they were quite good, those kings, okay? So what do you notice about Israel? It's very bad. What do you notice about Judah? Kind of up and down, yeah? Right, so we're going to take a very brief look at some of these kings, not all of them, because we haven't got all day, of Israel and Judah. So, we know the kingdom was split, and Rehoboam, he actually tried to regain the kingdom of Israel, but was told by the prophet to go back home because it was Yahweh's doing that the kingdom was rent in two. Right, so let's have a look at something that Jeroboam did. Who's got Jeroboam?
1 Kings 12:31. Jeroboam built shrines on high places and appointed priests from all sorts of people, even though they were not Levites.
Okay, thank you. So Yahweh had set an order for the Levites, and Jeroboam went beyond that and appointed priests from anybody he chose. Right, let's have a look at Asa, king of Judah. Who's got Asa? Richard.
Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as his father David had done. Although he did not remove the high places, Asa's heart was fully committed to the Lord in all his life.
Okay. So, not too bad, but not too good either, because he didn't remove the high places. Mm-hmm. Let's take a trip over to Israel. Who's got Omri? Right, David. Let's hear about Omri.
But Omri did evil in the eyes of Yahweh and sinned more than all those before him. He followed completely the ways of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, committing the same sin Jeroboam has caused Israel to commit, so that they aroused the anger of Yahweh, the God of Israel, by their worthless idols.
Okay, so Omri was not a good king at all. Ahab. Who's got Ahab? Right, Rhoda.
Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of Yahweh than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ithbar, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal and worship him.
Okay, so marks out of 10 for Omri. 10 is the best. Minus 6. Okay, he was a very evil. Ahab. Sorry. Yeah, Ahab was very evil. And we have the Baal worship. We have the marriage to Jezebel. If you know anything about Jezebel, that was a downfall. Right. Okay, let's move to Jehoshaphat, king of Judah.
In everything he followed the ways of his father Asa, and did not stray from them. He did what was right in the eyes of Yahweh. The high places, however, were not removed, and the people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there.
Okay, so marks out of 10 for Jehoshaphat. 7, 8, 9. Yeah, but he didn't remove the high places. That was, we worship Yahweh. Just to put a spokes in the works. Yeah, so he followed Yahweh, but he didn't remove the high places. So there was still the temptation there to go and worship idols. Right, what about Jehu, king of Israel? Now, Jehu is an interesting character. If you read, he actually tricked the worshippers of Baal, and he invited them all to an assembly where they were supposedly going to come and worship Baal. And then, because he was not a bad king, he commanded his men to kill them all. All right, so who's got Jehu? Sasha.
So Jehu destroyed Baal worship in Israel. However, he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, which had caused Israel to commit to worship of the golden calves of Bethel and Dan. Yahweh said to Jehu, "Because you have done well in accomplishing what is right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab all I had in mind to do, your descendants will sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation." Yet Jehu was not careful to keep the law of Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, with all his heart. He did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, which had caused Israel to commit.
Okay, marks out of 10 for Jehu. Oh, we've gone quiet now. Right, remember, he did good. He got rid of the Baal worshippers, but he didn't get rid of what didn't he get rid of? Not quite good enough. Okay. He didn't turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, worship of golden calves. So there was still potential for idolatry there, wasn't there? Right, what about Amaziah, king of Judah? Who's got Amaziah? Sister Beryl. Do you want to wait for the mic? I know you've got a loud voice, but just in case.
Amaziah, he did what was right in the eyes of Yahweh, but not as his father David had done. In everything he followed the example of his father Joash.
Okay. All right, so we have a bit of a rise in Amaziah, king of Judah. Remember, his father Joash was the king who came to the throne young, and he had to get rid of Athaliah, the wicked grandmother. Okay. Right, let's go back to Israel, to a king called Menahem. That's Abigail.
He did evil in the eyes of Yahweh. During his entire reign, he did not turn away from the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, which he had caused Israel to commit.
Okay. Right, so that's not a good one. And there's lots of reference back to Jeroboam, who obviously led the people astray. And we have links to their fathers, and sometimes they might have had a good father, but they committed the sins of the father that was bad. So it's like, it was what was in their hearts. Why did they go after these things? Right, who's got Jotham? Judah. Okay, Sister Val.
This is about Jotham, or Jotham of Judah. He did what was right in the eyes of Yahweh, just as his father Uzziah had done. The high places, however, were not removed. The people continued to offer sacrifices and burn incense there. Jotham rebuilt the upper gate of the temple of Yahweh. Not bad.
Okay. Out of 10?
7.
7. Okay. Right, so even though we do have some good kings, it's like they didn't make the standard, did they? They didn't raise themselves high enough to be able to say that they kept the covenant and they did all that was right in the eyes of Yahweh. Because even though maybe their hearts were towards Yahweh, and there were times of restoration, there were times, for example, when the kings, like one of them found the book of the law and gathered the people together and said, okay, this is what it says, let's keep the Passover, let's do this, do that. It's like there was always something that was lacking, like they didn't remove the high places. And you know, we can be guilty, can't we? We can have our hearts set to serve Yahweh and set to do his will, set to be ambassadors for him. But are there some high places that still need to be removed? You know, things that we hanker after that we might not go after all the time, but they're there in case we need them. You know? Yahweh's covenant was a high standard. And Yahweh was a jealous Elohim, and he wanted to be served, him and him only. And we find at the end of Israel's period of reign, a king called Hoshea, and he was the last and final king of Israel. And during his reign, okay, that can be off the next slide. During his reign, Shalmaneser, the king of Assyria, invaded the land, and he captured Samaria and deported the Israelites to Assyria. So all the kingdom of Israel then was invaded, they were taken off, there ceased to be a kingdom of Israel. In 2 Kings 17, verse 7 to 16, we kind of see a summary of the downfall of the nation as a whole and the reason why they were taken into captivity. Okay, we can see they sinned against the one who had delivered them from Egypt. They worshipped other gods. They followed the practices of other nations. They set up high places and burned incense to idols. They refused to listen to Yahweh. They rejected his decrees and the covenant he made with their fathers. They practiced divination and sorcery. They sold themselves to do evil, provoking Yahweh to anger. So it's no wonder then that Yahweh was very angry with Israel and removed them from his presence. Only the tribe of Judah was left, and even Judah did not keep the commands of Yahweh their Elohim. They followed the practices Israel had introduced. So Israel, you are no more, I'm afraid. But Judah enjoys a little bit longer, a few more kings to reign over them. Judah remains in the hands of Hezekiah, who was a good king. So when Israel was taken away, Judah remained and experienced a certain period of righteous reign through Hezekiah. And remember, it was the prophet Isaiah that prophesied and was around in Hezekiah's reign. But nevertheless, Judah's time also ran out. in 597 BC, we find that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, comes and invades Judah. Jehoiakim, who was a new king of Judah, handed over the city of Jerusalem to Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar then appoints a new king, Zedekiah. Nebuchadnezzar also deports around 10,000 Jews to his capital in Babylon. 586 BC, we find that Jerusalem and the temple are destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar. So the fate of Israel also becomes the fate of Judah. They are carried off into captivity. What then? Well, really, what was needed was a renewed relationship, because Israel really had fluffed it. They'd gone astray, gone their own way. What hope was there? And to find what hope there was, I'm going to return to the book of Hosea. We've already realised that the marriage of Hosea to a prostitute typified the relationship between Yahweh and Israel. Yahweh had taken Israel unto himself, and they had gone astray. Hosea 4 verse 12 says, "A spirit of prostitution leads them astray. They are unfaithful to their God." Like the names of Hosea's wife and first son, Israel's time in the land of promise had come to an end, and it was time for them to reap the curse for their idolatry, which was to be scattered throughout the nations. Was the relationship destined to end this way? Was Yahweh aware of the consequences for Israel in this relationship? Let's ask a question of Hosea. Did Hosea know the nature of the woman that he was taking unto himself? Yes. Yahweh says, marry, take unto yourself a prostitute. Hosea was well aware what type of woman this person was. And I read one scholar notes, what it is important to us to observe, however, is the fact that Hosea knew the waywardness of his wife from the beginning of their marriage, just as Yahweh was aware of the infidelity of Israel from the time of the wilderness period. Now, who of us would go and marry somebody who we knew was going to let us down, betray us, forsake us? You know, if we knew, would we take that step? And yet, this shows me how gracious Yahweh is. Because Yahweh, in his foreknowledge and yet in his mercy, took a people to himself, even knowing that they, like Adam, were going to transgress the covenant. You see, Israel had no more guarantee of success in obeying Yahweh than Adam did. And even the sacrificial system couldn't have saved them from the waywardness of their inner nature. But what does Yahweh say? It wasn't even the sacrificial system that was going to make the relationship work. Because Yahweh says, I delight in loyalty rather than sacrifice, and in the knowledge of Yahweh rather than burnt offerings. Yahweh wanted a people who were going to be faithful to him. You know, all the rituals, all the bringing of offerings to atone for sin, that was a temporary measure to cover them for when they slipped up. But really, that wasn't what Yahweh wanted. Yahweh wanted faithfulness. He wanted loyalty. He wanted a true relationship. You see, loyalty to the covenant would have meant there was no need for sacrifice. It was through the sacrificial offering that Yahweh's mercy was extended. If Israel had really kept to their pledge at Sinai, all the words Yahweh says we will do, that would have been enough. Yahweh wanted a faithful bride, a loyal people to seek to know him. Were his plans thwarted? Was Israel cast away forever? No, because Yahweh is merciful. A plan of redemption was still alive in the heart of Yahweh, a plan where any future restoration would be a matter of divine grace rather than human achievement, because human achievement had failed. And we read in Hosea 2 verse 19, I will betroth you to me in righteousness and in justice, in loving kindness and in compassion, because Yahweh's compassion, his righteousness and his justice had not run out. Israel transgressed the covenant, but Yahweh was constant throughout because he was the constant party in the agreement. And the hope of a renewed relationship was not lost. Though Israel has been scattered, that is not the end. And we can see from Hosea 2 verse 23 how Yahweh plans to reverse what has happened. Let's look at the names of Hosea's children again. Jezreel, scatter. But Yahweh says, I will sow her for myself in the land. Lo Rahama, no compassion. But then Yahweh says, I will also have compassion on her who had not obtained compassion. Lo Ami, not my people. But Yahweh says, and I will say to those who are not my people, you are my people. And so although Israel had been adulterous, forfeited the blessings of the covenant, yet Yahweh's love is unfailing and his covenant remains. And echoes of hope resound from the mouth of Hosea when he says, come, let us return to Yahweh, for he has torn us, but he will heal us. He has wounded us, but he will bandage us. He will revive us after 2 days. He will raise us up on the 3rd day, that we may live before him. So let us know, let us press on to know Yahweh. His going forth is as certain as the dawn, and he will come to us like the rain, like the spring rain, watering the earth. Beautiful promise of hope for Israel. You see, because Yahweh knew that further down the line there was to be a second Adam, a greater than Moses, a once and for all sacrifice, a promise that would extend to generations to come, both Jew and Gentile, a new covenant that was promised by the prophet Jeremiah. And this is the covenant. I'm not going to go into detail about this because I don't want to tread on anybody's toes, but I would like us all to read this. And I'm going to ask the men to read the white text at the beginning, the women to read the yellow, the men to read the next white, and everybody to read the bold white at the end. Is that okay? So, men.
Behold, the days are coming, declares Yahweh, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah.
Not like the covenant which I made with their fathers in the day I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt. My covenant which they broke, though I was a husband to them, declares Yahweh.
But this is the covenant which I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares Yahweh.
I will put my law within them, and on their hearts I will write it, and What a promise to Israel. You see, in conclusion, Israel were chosen of Yahweh. They experienced his power and his presence in many ways. Though they had a faithful Elohim, they were a faithless people who, like the father of all mankind, transgressed the covenant. Though likened to a prostitute because of their unfaithfulness, Yahweh's love was unwavering, and his desire for a covenant people remained constant. Though Israel was scattered, Yahweh promised to regather them and to initiate a new covenant which would bring hope to Adam's race. But note, this covenant is still to be made with the house of Israel and with the house of Judah. So how do we fit into this covenant? I'm not going to tell you that, because I'd like you to keep coming, and I think it's not even next week or the week after, but the week after that we're going to have another message which is very important, because otherwise you might not know how you fit into this. So I would encourage you to come along. But in the meantime, what is important is that we find ourselves in the household of faith, because without faith it is impossible to please Yahweh. So let's remain in the household of faith, and let's see if the household of faith can somehow tie into this household of Israel and Judah. Yahweh bless you.
Yahweh bless you.